Chris Davies, we know he's the footy manager at the Power, and he joins us. Chris, thanks for your time.
No worries, Mark. How are you?
CD?
We are very well. Now, if we can start with the SANFL Commission, they made some changes regarding the two AFL clubs. Can you just tell us how they've affected your club, Port Adelaide?
Yeah, well, I mean, we worked, the SANFL had told us from a fair way out of their view that, some things had to change with regard to the way that both Adelaide and Port Adelaide got our contracted players. So for us, obviously the significant change is that, we've now got a salary cap to help, retain and attract players to our SANFL contract list. We think we'll get better access to some additional talented players with some of the things that the SANFL have done, and really importantly for us to get access to, some of our next generation academy players so that they can come in, spend some time with our program, with our SANFL program, before going into, their draft year, which is something that's offered in every other state, other than South Australia. So for the SANFL to make that decision was, a significant outcome for us. And obviously on the balance of the SANFL making those changes, the club has also made the decision to not field a team in the SANFL reserves next year.
So that was the club's call?
Oh, well, look, we were aware that it was the SANFL's preference that Port Adelaide and Adelaide existed largely on the same standing with regard to our rules at SANFL level. So we were aware that was the case, and on the balance of the changes that the SANFL have made, yes, the club has made the decision to not field the reserves team next year.
Okay, the father-son and the academy players, can you just elaborate a bit on that? I'm led to believe that if they are under the age of 18 and they're good enough to play, they can only play 4 games and not against the club that they're from. Yeah, so
we've got a good example of one next year. Darren Mead's son, Jackson Mead, is a member of the state junior programs, has also been a part of our next generation academy, and potentially in 2020 could end up on our AFL list if he continues to progress in the way that he has. What we've got an opportunity to do next year is to have him play with us at SANFL level after the national championships. Excuse me, which will give us an opportunity to continue to assess his talent, but also importantly to bring him into our program earlier. And you've seen Adelaide have had a couple of guys over the last few years who maybe would have been better placed if they could have come into an AFL program sooner.
Your Magpies have been cherry-picked over the years. Robbie Young springs to mind. Young Gray's gone to the Eagles. I can see why you've done what you've done. Are you happy with the concessions that the SANFL have granted? Have they gone far enough? Are the top-ups going to be of quality that are going to be of use at SANFL level, do you think, CD, or better than what you've had before?
Well, I think over time, as you say, Stephen, the quality of our SANFL contract list has probably diminished, and that's on the basis largely that, in 2014 we were able to retain a number of the players who were already playing for Port Adelaide at the time at SANFL level. So that was always a likelihood, but I think that the changes will certainly give us greater access to talent, and they'll also help us to retain the talent that we have. We've been fighting a battle against the other SANFL clubs who can offer guaranteed money to players. In some situations can offer better opportunities, but I think that the changes that the SANFL have made will help both Port Adelaide and Adelaide to retain the talent that we've got.
Port GM of Footy, Chris Davies, our guest, CD, we affectionately call him. The Pollock deal, is it all but done?
There's still a bit to work through. Obviously, we're dealing with North Melbourne in regard to it, and I imagine that it should be a situation that gets ticked off pretty early in the trade period. But fair to say, right now there's no deal that's been struck between the two clubs. Okay,
you after their pick 10 or 11? It might slide to 11 or 12.
Yeah, I think in fairness to Jared's level of talent and to the offer that North Melbourne have put to Jared, I think it would only be fair that we're asked in return for something of quality, and North Melbourne's first pick is around the mark, we think.
The other one that's had huge speculation is Chad Wingard. Talk to your members. What is the situation with Chad? What has the club directed him to do, and what has he said back to you?
Yeah, look, it's been a fascinating situation. Obviously, we've been party to this before. We had a situation a few years ago with Hamish Hartnett, where a number of clubs came really hard at Hamish in the year before he got into his restricted free agency. I mean, the same thing has probably happened with Chad. His manager, Tom Petroro, is a guy that we deal with regularly. He has a number of our, our better quality players on our AFL list who he manages. So we talk to Tom regularly. Tom's going through a process right now of helping Chad to assess, where his value is at, and we've been comfortable with that happening. I read and heard some stuff about Chad needing to say that he wanted to stay with us. I mean, the reality is right now is Chad's contracted for next year, so until someone suggests that he wants to go anywhere, we're moving along with the status quo at the moment, and that is that Chad's getting an assessment of his value in the marketplace. That's what happens regularly, and when the trade period starts, right now we expect Chad to be at our club at the end of that trade period.
Okay, that's good. So has Tom come back to you and said this is his value? These are the clubs that have valued him: a 4-year, a 5-year, a mil, 850, 950. You know where that sits?
In fairness, right now, I think that's still in Chad and Tom's court, and that will obviously be driven by where Chad wants to end up, whether he wants to be at Port Adelaide long term or whether we should look to start to negotiate down the track. But I think some of it's been unfair on Chad. The idea that he has to tell us he needs to stay. Right now, we're proceeding on the basis that Chad will be at Port Adelaide in 2019. Okay,
would you contemplate as a list group and management to extend his contract if that's what he wanted to do at the market rate?
Yeah, I mean, they're all the things that you look at from here. I mean, the challenge for us is, in a disappointing year, is to make sure that we're making changes that are necessary to get better. What they are, it's the responsibility of Jason Cripps, our list manager, Ken, obviously, as coach, and myself and our list management group to try and pull the right reins at the moment to make sure that we give ourselves the best opportunity to be successful in 2019.
Okay, it sounds from the club's perspective, you'd be willing for him to go if you got good enough compensation. It's not he has to stay. I'm saying he has to stay. You're not saying that. Your club's not saying that.
Well, I don't think that we need to get into the fact that we need to say that every player is needing to stay. I mean, right now, there's nothing different other than the fact that Chad is contracted for 2019 and we expect him to be at the club. Now, if he comes to us over the next period of time and suggests that he doesn't want that, then the club's got an assessment to make. But in fairness to Chad, nothing along those lines has been talked to back to the club. So I think it's a significant hypothetical that we don't need to cross right now.
Scott Lycett, your club's been linked to him. Are you expecting to get an answer from him in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that by the weekend that we would have a better understanding of where Scott wants to end up. There's certainly from a Port Adelaide Footy Club perspective, we understand that we're really heavily reliant on Paddy Ryder, and we want to make sure that we've got some quality help for Paddy as well. So Scott's certainly a player that we've shown some interest in, and being a former Port Adelaide Magpies junior, obviously is a person that we've followed pretty significantly along the way. So if Scott Lycett wanted to leave the West Coast, then we'd be in the discussion, absolutely.
The other one that's caused a lot of discussion around both clubs, for that matter, is with the absolute elite talent from South Australia at the top end of the draft. Are you looking at or entertaining the thought of maybe packaging something that gets you into, say, the top 5 picks so you can have a crack at that talent?
Yeah, look, we'll end up during the trade period in a position that we want to, be in to maximise our capabilities at the draft. So, I think it's fair to say that both South Australian-based clubs will be looking at the South Australian-based talent and wanting to get as much of it as we possibly can. Now, how we do that, whether it's packaging more picks and getting up the draft list, or retaining multiple picks in different spots, I guess is the thing that will be worked out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. But right now I'm not going to rule anything in or out, other than to say that there's obviously some really clear, good talent from South Australia at the top of this draft list, and if you're going to want to pick up the likes of Lukosius or Rankin, you're going to have to probably be slightly higher than where we are right now.
Are you negotiating with Tom Jonas's management over a new deal? Is that a priority?
Yeah, look, Tom's had a couple of great seasons. Tom's a long-term player at our footy club, and there's no reason to suggest that he won't be at Port Adelaide into the future. He's obviously contracted for next year, and I would imagine that Tom wouldn't want to go anywhere else.
Have Sydney been a knocking?
I've heard you guys say that a fair bit, and the reality is that no, Sydney haven't spoken to us about whether Tom Jonas was going to go there or not, and our club is negotiating in good faith with his manager at the moment to extend that period of time, but that will be done over the course of the next month or so, I imagine.
Good work. Homch, Pittard and Amon, are they all out the door?
Certainly there are a group of guys who have either expressed an interest to us to want to explore their options through this trade period because they don't feel like they're going to get the opportunities at Port Adelaide, and there's probably a couple amongst that list that you've mentioned there who we have said, although you contracted, if you wanted to look at what your opportunities were, that we're comfortable with you doing that as well. So look, all of those guys are actually contracted to Port Adelaide for next year. Where they end up through this trade period will largely be their call, I think.
And with Jared Pollock going, are you looking for a mature age, ready-made player to step in, or are you saying, we've got some players in our Sandfield team that we've drafted in the last couple of years that we think are ready to step up into that role?
Yeah, well, I think that, ultimately that's a question for Ken, but I think we've got a number of players who can play in the role that Jared will potentially leave at Port Adelaide at the moment, whether that's Motlop, whether it's Boak, whether it's Evert, those types of guys can flip out to that role, whether it's Justin Westhoff, who's obviously had a fantastic year. But yeah, again, we'll look at what the options are throughout the trade period to see who we can potentially bring in to fill any spots that we think need to be filled. Now, clearly, you guys have identified some outside run as something that Port Adelaide needs. I think it's reasonable to suggest that we think the same. So whether that's a new player or that's an existing player, we'll play it over the next period of time. But we're not going to close our eyes to any opportunities that may exist in that space at the moment.
You got money in the bank by the sounds. AFL's Ken Wood reckons Port's TPP is the second lowest of the 18 clubs. Can you tell us what percentage you are of the TPP?
I could tell you, but I won't. Look, we have, I think Ken Hinckley has suggested over a period of time that we've been well planned with our money. We've got the capability to continue to pay our existing group, and potentially with Scott Lycett, being discussed, then we've obviously got to have some money to be able to bring players into the club. So, we're confident we've got some money banked from previous years. If there was an absolute need to bring a player in, then I think we've got the capability to do that if we want it.
CD, all the best with the BNF, and thanks for your time as always.
Good on you guys. Thank you.